The nurses drew lots to avoid him. She didn't know that when she took the assignment. She only knew that the most decorated general in the Union Army lay silent in Ward 7, and someone needed to change his dressing before infection set in. Margaret Wells walked into the ward at dawn with her basin and clean bandages. She stopped at his cot. General James Harding was awake. His eyes tracked her movement, gray, cold, assessing. The kind of eyes that had sent thousands of men into battle and watched too many not return. "General Harding," she said, "I'm here to change your dressing." He said nothing. He'd said nothing for 3 weeks. Not since they pulled him from the battlefield at Cold Harbor with a bullet lodged near his heart. The surgeons had saved his life. No one had figured out how to bring him back to it. Margaret set her supplies on the bedside table. "This will take 10 minutes. I'll try to be gentle, but the wound is deep. It's going to hurt." Still nothing. She pulled back the blanket, reached for the bandage. His hand shot up and caught her wrist. Not violently, not painfully, but with absolute authority. The grip of a man who had commanded armies and would not be touched without his permission. Their eyes met. Margaret didn't pull away, didn't flinch. She looked at him the way she looked at everything in this hospital. Directly, without fear, with the calm recognition that fear helped no one and patience needed honesty more than comfort. "You can stop me," she said quietly. "That's your right. But the wound needs cleaning, or you'll lose more than a battle. You'll lose your life." She waited. After 5 seconds that felt like 50, his hand released her wrist. She cleaned the wound in silence. He watched her the entire time. Not the ceiling, not the window, her. When she pressed clean gauze against the sutured skin, he inhaled sharply but made no sound. "You didn't cry out," she said, binding the bandage. "Most men do." "Most men," he said. The first words he'd spoken in 3 weeks. "Haven't had worse." His voice was rough from disuse, but it was steady. Margaret looked at him. Really looked. Past the medals everyone whispered about. Past the legend they said walked these halls. She saw a man who'd carried too much for too long and had finally been forced to stop. "No," she agreed. "I imagine they haven't." She gathered her supplies. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Your name?" She glanced back. "Margaret Wells." "Come back tomorrow, Miss Wells." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite an order either. "I will," she said. She came back the next morning and the next. Each time, he watched her work. Each time, he spoke a few more words. On the 4th day, he told her about the wound. A sharpshooter at 200 yards. The moment before the bullet hit when he'd known it was coming and hadn't moved. "Why didn't you move?" she asked. "My men were behind me. If I'd moved, they would have." Margaret pressed fresh gauze against the healing wound. "That's the stupidest piece of heroism I've ever heard." Something flickered in his eyes. Not offense. Something warmer. "You're the first person who said that. I imagine most people don't speak to generals that way." "They don't speak to me at all," he said. "They speak at me, or around me, or about me. You're the first person in 3 weeks who's treated me like a man instead of a monument." Margaret tied off the bandage. "You are a man. The wound proves it." That night, the head nurse pulled her aside. "The general," Nurse Pritchard said carefully. "He's particular about who tends him. I've noticed. He's requested you specifically. For all his care." Margaret frowned. "That's irregular." "So is a general who let a bullet hit him to protect his men." Pritchard's expression softened. "He trusts you, Margaret. In this place, that's worth more than protocol." Margaret returned to Ward 7 the next morning. The general was sitting up for the first time, his back against the iron bed frame. "You're moving," she said. "I'm healing." She set down her supplies, reached for the bandage. This time, he didn't stop her. But as she leaned close to check the sutures, something happened that neither of them expected. Her hand, steadying herself against the edge of the cot, slipped. She caught herself against his chest, palm flat against the bare skin above his heart, where the bandage didn't cover. She froze. So did he. Every nurse knew. General James Harding did not permit touch. He'd refused examinations, turned away chaplains. Once, when a well-meaning orderly had tried to help him stand, he'd gone so rigid the boy had fled the ward in tears. Margaret's hand was pressed directly over his heart. She felt it beating. Steady, strong, alive. She started to pull back. His hand covered hers. Not gripping, not restraining, just holding it there. "Don't," he said quietly. She went still. They stayed like that, her palm against his chest, his hand over hers, while the morning light crept across Ward 7 and the world outside continued without them. Margaret's training told her to pull away. Her instinct told her to stay. She stayed. "General, James," he said. His voice was different now. Lower. Raw. "When someone touches you like you're human, you can use their name. Mine is James." She met his eyes. The coldness was gone. What remained was something she hadn't expected to find in a man who'd built walls high enough to keep out armies. Loneliness. "James," she said carefully, "I should finish the dressing." His hand lifted from hers. Slowly, as though releasing something he hadn't meant to hold. Margaret stepped back and finished her work in silence. But something had changed. The air between them felt different, charged, aware, like the moment before lightning strikes when you can taste the electricity. When she left, his eyes followed her all the way to the door. That afternoon, Nurse Pritchard found her in the supply room. "Colonel Warren was here," Pritchard said, "asking questions about you." Margaret's hands stilled on the bandage she was rolling. "What kind of questions?" "Your background. Your family. Whether you've shown particular attention to the general." "I'm his nurse." "Margaret," Pritchard's voice dropped. "The general is the most valuable man in this hospital. Some would say in this entire army. There are people who want to control his recovery. Use it for political advantage. They don't like that he's requested a nurse they can't influence. I'm not trying to influence him. I'm trying to heal him. I know that. But they don't care about the difference." Margaret set down the bandage. "What are you telling me?" "Be careful. The general trusts you. That makes you dangerous to men who need him to trust them instead." The warning settled into Margaret's chest like a stone. She returned to Ward 7 that evening for the second dressing change. James was standing, actually standing, at the window, looking out at the hospital grounds. "You're on your feet," she said. "The wound is closing. You do good work, Miss Wells." "Margaret," she said, "if I'm using your name, you can use mine." He turned. The evening light caught his face, and she saw him clearly for the first time. Not the general, not the legend, just a man who'd been carrying the weight of a war and had finally found someone willing to help him set it down. "Margaret," he said, like he was testing the shape of it. She crossed the room with her supplies. "Sit. I need to check the sutures." He sat on the edge of the cot. She unwrapped the bandage carefully, checking for infection, for fever, for any sign that the wound was turning. It wasn't. It was healing beautifully. "You'll be back to duty in a month," she said. "I know." Something in his voice made her look up. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part gratitude, part something deeper. "You don't want to go back," she said quietly. "I'll go back because I have to. Because those men need someone to lead them." He paused. "But for the first time in 4 years, I've remembered what it feels like to be something other than a weapon." Margaret's throat tightened. She pressed the fresh bandage against his chest, smoothing the edges with careful fingers. His hand came up and caught hers again, not stopping her this time, just holding. "Margaret," he said, "when I leave here." The door banged open. Colonel Warren strode in, 2 officers behind him. His eyes went straight to Margaret's hand beneath James's, and his expression hardened. "General Harding," Warren said coldly, "I see you're receiving very personal care." Margaret pulled her hand back, started to step away. James stood. Despite the wound, despite 3 weeks flat on his back, he rose to his full height with the bearing of a man who'd commanded thousands, and the officers in the doorway felt it. "Colonel Warren," James said, his voice like iron, "Miss Wells is performing her duties with exceptional skill. If you're implying otherwise, choose your next words carefully." Warren's jaw clenched. "Sir, there have been concerns." "Concerns?" James took 1 step forward. Just one. It was enough. "The only concern in this ward should be the health of the men recovering here. Miss Wells has done more for my recovery than every doctor and officer who's walked through that door combined." He looked at Margaret, then back at Warren. "If anyone suggests otherwise," James said quietly, "they'll answer to me. Personally." The silence was absolute. Warren's face had gone white. "Yes, sir. Leave us." Warren left. The officers followed. Margaret stood frozen, her supplies clutched to her chest. James turned to her. The hardness melted from his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "That won't happen again. You can't protect me from gossip, James. Not when you're a general." He stepped closer. "Margaret, I've spent 4 years protecting men on battlefields. I think I can manage protecting one woman from small-minded fools in a hospital. It's not that simple. No, he agreed. It's not. He reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to move away, and touched her face. Just his fingertips against her cheek, so gentle she barely felt it. But I'm going to try anyway, he said. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow nurse's quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. His hand on hers. His voice when he defended her. The way he touched her face like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. She'd tended 100 soldiers. None of them had ever looked at her the way James Harding did. And none of them had ever made her forget, even for a moment, that she was a professional doing her job. The next morning, she almost didn't go to Ward 7. But she'd never been a coward. She gathered her supplies and walked through the door at dawn, chin high, ready for whatever came next. James was awake, waiting. I thought you might not come, he said quietly. I gave you my word. Words break. I've learned that the hard way. Margaret set down her basin. Mine don't. She changed his dressing in silence. The wound was nearly closed now. Pink, healthy tissue where torn flesh had been. Another week, and he wouldn't need her care at all. The thought sat heavy in her chest. Margaret, James said as she tied off the bandage. When I'm discharged, I'm being sent to Washington. There's talk of a promotion. A position at the War Department. That's good news. Is it? He caught her hand before she could pull away. It means leaving here. Leaving you. She looked down at their joined hands. I'm your nurse, James. This was always temporary. Was it? His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Because it doesn't feel temporary. It feels like the first real thing I've had in 4 years. Margaret's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. I'm a field nurse from Pennsylvania. You're a general. The most decorated officer in the Union Army. There's no world where. There's this world, he interrupted. Right here. You and me. That's the only world I care about anymore. James, I'm asking you to come with me. To Washington. He stood, still holding her hand. Not as my nurse. As, whatever you want to be. I'll find you a position at the Surgeon General's office. Where you can work independently. Where you can do nothing at all except let me take you to dinner and talk about something other than this damned war. Margaret stared at him. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking if you feel what I feel. If the past 3 weeks have been as real for you as they've been for me. She should say no. Should remind him of propriety, of rank, of the 100 reasons why a general and a nurse could never. Yes, she whispered. His face transformed. The careful control cracked, and what came through was pure, unguarded relief. Then come with me, he said. Please. She thought of Pennsylvania, of the quiet life she'd planned to return to after the war, of everything sensible and safe and expected. Then she thought of this man who'd let no one touch him and tell her, who'd defended her without hesitation, who looked at her like she'd brought him back from somewhere dark and didn't know how to thank her except by offering everything he had. Yes, she said again. James pulled her close, carefully, mindful of the wound, and pressed his forehead to hers. Thank you, he breathed. 2 weeks later, General James Harding was discharged from the field hospital with full honors and a recommendation for promotion. He left in a military carriage with his uniform pressed and his medals polished, and Margaret Wells sitting beside him. The nurses watched from the ward windows. Nurse Pritchard smiled. Well, she said to no one in particular. I suppose that's one way to heal a man. In Washington, James kept his word. He found Margaret a position at the Surgeon General's office, though she rarely made it to work, because she was too busy reorganizing his chaotic household and teaching him how to live like a human being instead of a commanding officer. They married in the spring, in a small ceremony that scandalized half of military society and delighted the other half. On their wedding night, in the quiet of their new home, Margaret pressed her hand to his chest again, over the scar, over his heart. Does it still hurt? She asked. James covered her hand with his. Not anymore. She looked up at him. You let me touch you. That first morning. What? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Because you were the first person who touched me like I was worth saving. Not the general. Not the hero. Just me. Margaret rose on her toes and kissed him. Soft. Sure. The kiss of a woman who'd chosen the hardest path and found it led exactly where she needed to go. You are worth saving, she said against his lips. All of you. Not just the parts the army wants. James pulled her close, careful even now, always careful with her. Outside, the war raged on. Men fought and died and fought again. But in this room, in this moment, there was only peace. Only a man who'd finally learned to let someone in. Only a woman brave enough to stay. James Harding had commanded armies, won battles, changed the course of history. But he would tell anyone who asked that the bravest thing he'd ever done was let a nurse press her hand to his chest and feel his heart still beating underneath. And the smartest thing he'd ever done was ask her to keep it.